Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. Welcome to number 18 or 19, I've lost count again, of the Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. I'm your host, Jeff Welton. It's going to be an exciting session today. We're talking about cloud-based everything. We've got several guests who know a lot more than me, which is my favorite kind of guest because that makes my job a whole lot easier. We've got Dub Irvin from Wide Orbit. Dub, welcome, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join you.
John Schur from Telos Alliance. John, again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me.
And last but not least, I'm not sure what order Ed picked when he put them on the title slide, but Nate Mumford from RCS Worldwide. Nate, thanks very much for being here today.
Hey guys, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, I got to tweak Nate because Nate's got the real microphone here, and so I got to ask: do you guys, any of you guys, have radio backgrounds?
Sorry, I'm the odd man out. TV side.
No, nothing wrong with being a TV guy. That radio with pictures thing, someday it might catch on.
Maybe.
And actually, the really last, but certainly not least, the disembodied voice himself, Mr. Edward Sylvester. Ed is the marketing guru that makes all this stuff happen, and without him, we would be hopelessly lost. So, Ed, thank you very much.
And thanks, Jeff. Guru is a strong word, but I appreciate it.
It's much better than the alternatives that were floating through my head. So, on that note, it's mandatory housekeeping comments. If you are an SBE member, this does qualify for half of a recertification credit under Category I of the SBE research schedule. Go to the shiny new SBE website. If you have not been on the SBE website in the last month or so, they have released a new updated one. We're out of the 90s and it looks pretty awesome. So great job there by the SBE. If you've got any questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns, there is a place to enter those things in the questions window. Type them in if you want to. If you're feeling brave and don't mind having your mic unmuted, hit the little hand wavy icon. We'll be more than happy to unmute you and make you part of the conversation. Sometimes that's even more entertaining. Now, you may remember one final housekeeping thing that Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester, has a different picture every week. The only requirement is the picture cannot be himself. And the contest is to see who the first person is to name the person. And this week, Van Milligan snuck in ahead of everybody else with Dr. Johnny Fever, Howard Hessman himself, WKRP in Cincinnati. And if you didn't get that, this is probably the wrong place for you to be. All right, enough with the sarcasm and all of that. We'll get some serious stuff. The standard agenda, of course, this has been the same agenda slide for the last 17 or 18 or 19 episodes, so we don't need to skip over that. We're going to talk about virtualization and cloud basing. And the funny thing is, there was just a thread on Facebook yesterday, day before, very recently, about that, and there's a lot of misunderstandings. So that is probably one of the first questions. John, I'm going to hit you first on this, but virtualization versus cloud-based. So virtualization is not somebody else's computer.
Yeah, so virtualization, at least for the folks that I work with, we talk about that as taking algorithms and processing that typically we would deploy in a hardware device, in a dedicated rack unit, and taking that same functionality and putting that into a software application, which can run in many, many different places. So that could just be running on a server on-prem. It could be deployed in a virtual machine on a server on-prem or in the cloud. And to me, that's the first step, but there are many steps to go from virtualization to actually deploying in the cloud. So virtualization to me is in some cases the easiest step, but there's a lot to consider when you're talking about moving something to the cloud, and that can include how you're going to deploy it, how do you take advantage of the things like scalability and flexibility, and how do you get content in and out of the cloud that typically comes from a remote site or an on-prem site.
Right. And Nate Mumford, you'd sent me some slides, and we'll touch on them too in a little bit. But one of the comments in one of your slides mentioned using both hardware and cloud-based type stuff. So do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big things when we're talking about the cloud, what I like to talk about for our clients when they say about what's a cloud solution here. The biggest thing, of course, is the technology. That's what's allowed us to evolve to this kind of this point. And honestly, if it was the easiest thing and it was budget friendly, everyone would be on the cloud. But we're just not exactly there yet, both internally as in how a client wants to structure their VM, be it private or a public server, as well as just kind of where they are in their workflows. And so we found is kind of that hybrid workflow where we can take the terrestrial aspects of traditional radio stations and how the hardware is configured, and then start applying some of these VMs, these cloud infrastructures to achieve a similar result, just with a little flexibility and plug and play options.
Cool. Cool. And Dub, I mean, Wide Orbit, you guys have done quite a bit with virtualization as well. Now, virtualization, of course, is just, as John said, the concept of taking something that used to be a purpose-built device and just software evolving it so you can put it wherever it's convenient. What are your thoughts on, like, the one thing that everybody complains about is what happens when the internet goes down? So what do you think the best solution for something like that would be?
Well, I think that definitely the best solution is to have something that's local that you can use. And I think that kind of goes to what Nate was just saying, is this kind of hybrid approach where you have either your main operation in the cloud, and that could be an on-prem private cloud implementation, or it could be something in a public space like in AWS, but some sort of DR system locally. We've had customers, for example, centralize their operations with a wide orbit system in a data center that they own, but then retain a DR solution locally that can be used in the event of a loss of connection to that data center. So I think it's very similar to what Nate said for us.
Right. And that's this is the part where I tell my one and only dad joke of the day. It's a communications type dad joke, so we can have some fun with it. But the running joke is that if you're ever in the woods and you worry about getting lost, just coil up 20 feet of fiber optic cable and stick it in your pocket. And then when you do get lost, you can just stretch it out on the ground. And, within half an hour, a backhoe will show up to cut it, so you can just hop a lift home.
That's it may not be a comfortable lift, but it is a lift at least.
I couldn't resist. It's too good. Now, so one question that's come up, and it's one of our sales guys. It always the sales guys that ask these kind of questions. But what is prem? So prem is premises, whether it's on premises, whether it's a device in your building, or off premise, whether it's a device in another building you own that's networked together, or whether it's via a cloud-based like Amazon Web Services, AWS, or something like that. So yeah, that's and this picture, for what it's worth, is taken from an article. I did send a link to the article if anybody wants a screenshot or grab it off the archive later. That article is a year old, and 1 year ago there was $146 billion tied up in cloud computing. That's billion with a B, and when you add enough billions together, you're talking about real money. And that's kind of the thing that we've been saying collectively for a while now, is that broadcasting really needs to leverage a lot of the IT stuff that's been out there for a while that we've kind of cheerfully been ignoring. And that's kind of where this is going. But again, and this brings to the last point and my dad joke, if the backhoe cuts the fiber, if you want to stay on the air, you better have something to keep things going. Whether it's an alternate internet connection, whether it's a hardware device sitting in your transmitter site. I told somebody you can be as good, as reliable, or as unreliable as you design it. Now, John, I see you nodding in the background there. So do you got any thoughts on backup as well while I'm thinking about it?
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of our larger broadcast customers, and the customers that might have several hundred channels have built completely separate facilities for disaster recovery. So that, cutting the fiber with the backhoe, hopefully that doesn't occur at the same time in two different cities. But that's one way. And then AWS, for example, it isn't specific to media and broadcasting, but they have built-in load balancing and redundancy that we can take advantage of in the broadcast industry, so that there can be automatic failover between different instances in the cloud.
Exactly. And while I got you on tap, let's talk a little bit about the intercom system that you guys have got out.
Yeah, so we started by developing, I'll call it traditional hardware intercom system. It's actually not very traditional in the sense that there's no matrix. A lot of intercom systems have a central matrix where everything ties back, and the matrix is then where the mixing and rendering occurs. Telos being a company that has its roots in audio over IP, we took advantage of audio over IP and created an intercom system with no matrix. So since audio over IP makes streams available to any device on the network, we could completely distribute things like the mixing and rendering across the devices. So that's the physical intercom that we created. But that we realized that lends itself very well for cloud deployment. So we were able to take the software that was running in these panels and belt packs and create Docker containers. So Docker is a way to instantiate applications and functionality in most often in the cloud. It's a lightweight container that we can spin up very quickly. So in this diagram, the upper left portion is what's running in the cloud, and that's representing these multiple Docker containers that they provide functionality like you would have with an intercom panel. In this diagram, we're showing how we can create a hybrid system with the hardware on-prem in the lower left corner, tie those together with audio over IP. That requires, quite a bit of bandwidth, of course, but over a wide area network, we're taking advantage of technology called WebRTC and Opus codec. And using that technology, we're able to communicate, we're able to establish connections with cell phones and tablets and PCs across a lower bandwidth wide area network. So this is an example of how we were able to virtualize the software and then deploy it in this distributed intercom system.
That's and one of the cool things, and I'm glad you brought it up. Chris Hayes is out of LA, and he's mentioned that you still have a last mile backhoe issue, even though the first mile is handled, we hope. And that is a really valid point, and that's where having some sort of hardware backup is still, it's a beneficial thing. I mean, if you've got a transmitter billing umpteen thousands of dollars a day, you're probably not going to not have a backup transmitter or an aux site if you're in a top 10 market. So definitely having something to keep the audio playing when the backhoe drives through the fiber half a mile away is a good idea. And thanks for making a point of that. There is an ebook out, little plug for that. Philip Schmidt, our CTO, made the comment that the goal is to have a transmitter with an Ethernet jack, and you plug everything into it. It's one part. The biggest thing, and this comes back to a lot of what everybody here has been showing, is the more physical pieces you have, the higher your risk of failure. And Dub, that's something that you guys have addressed fairly early on too. So maybe you could talk to that a little bit. I know you've talked about MTBFs once or twice before.
Well, and we have, and so really what we've really sought to do was to have a couple of different things. One was real-time failover of the critical components from either one computer to another in the most simple on-prem installation, or to another location. That's really where the technology needs to go. Just to everyone's point earlier about site redundancy and things like that, and so that's really, I think what a broadcast system needs to do. Anything that is a critical part of the infrastructure that's delivering programming and running the operation, just real-time failover from one location to another, and it be seamless to both the user and the listener. And so I think that's a key part of both.
Right, exactly. Good point. And Nate, you'd sent me a few slides about Zeta, and I know Zeta had the disaster recovery system and a few other things like that. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about how you guys have done some of this stuff.
Absolutely. And to follow up, on Dub's point, we have the traditional, redundancy purposes. You have we have SQL as our base for Microsoft SQL, and so that's where all the data is stored. You can take your backups and copy them different file servers. But what we have with Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery is really kind of incorporate, that Zeta Cloud site, which by the way runs on Amazon Web Services. So we were talking before about a private versus, public server. We use AWS, but we have our own private S3 buckets and all of that for Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery. So it's truly written on AWS, and we treat it like a separate site. So if you're looking at here, this is kind of the typical cluster development, right? We have the Zeta file server, we got production machines that have either Zeta and G selector, we have some on-air machines, and of course the main playout. So if you go to the next slide there, and of course we do have Zeta to go as well, that incorporates that kind of cloud-esque, but the services off a file server. But when you have this Zeta Cloud hybrid network, what we're doing here is talking about you have the main cluster facility on the left. That's kind of your hardware, your structure. What we have is essentially Zeta Cloud site replication. And what that does is it treats the two sites that are in sync. So when you do let's say a log change in Zeta, if you add a new song, a new schedule, that's automatically site repped to your cloud. It's a separate instance, a separate market. The only difference is instead of linear, it's vertical up in the cloud. And then at that point in time, the Zeta Cloud takes over for Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery. You have your station, you have, whatever your microphone and board tools are. So for example, I can do my Zeta Cloud right here with my, microphone and USB interface and all that good stuff. And I can control the station. And then of course, Zeta Cloud, every station has its own encoder built into it. So when you see that station R1-1, that's essentially your embedded or stream playout. At that point in time, it goes to wherever you want that signal to go. When we talk about, redundancies, in that Ethernet cable that's at the transmitter site. I know that some transmitters now have URL capability for failover. You can put your Zeta Cloud, encoder stream on that transmitter. And again, you're operating in your local Zeta. You have the redundancy for backups, audio, schedules in Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery, and then you have the playout on top of that.
Very, very cool. Now, I'm going to open a microphone here. I see Shane Tovin's in the audience. And so, Shane, I know that you had talked a little bit to that thread the other day on, I think it was the Broadcasting Club, about virtualization. And so what are your thoughts, just real quick?
Well, hey, guys. Well, yeah, I agree with all of the comments here, in terms of on-prem versus running in the cloud when you talk about virtualization and the last mile. These are all very real challenges, and especially when you're talking about remote mountaintop transmitter sites. I mean, how do you deal with that last mile? I mean, right now, for instance, we're dealing with satellite for the most part. Maybe we have some redundant connectivity there in terms of a traditional ISP. But I mean, you start looking at technologies like what's coming out with SpaceX and Starlink, things like that. Suddenly, you've got a whole new option available to you for that last mile challenge. So yeah, there's some really, really exciting things going on here in this space. And yeah, I mean, there are so many misconceptions as well. I mean, think back to when we started with AOIP, people thought about the internet and the streaming experience that they had with real audio and all of that fun stuff. Well, it's as we learned now, it's a whole new ball game in this era. It was that way when we started with AOIP, and now it's that way when we're talking about cloud computing and virtualization. We've come so far, and it's only going to get better and better.
Yep, exactly. Thanks for that, Shane. Oh, and when we were practicing yesterday, your name came up, and John mentioned something about an Employee a Month award or something like that. I forget exactly how it went.
Hi, John.
Hi there. Good to see you.
So, full disclosure, Shane worked for John with Linear Acoustics not that many years ago. Well, in radio it was decades, but
yeah, about 3 years ago.
Moves a little faster.
Yeah, glad to see you're still making trouble in the industry. So.
Hey, Jeff, I have a comment with Shane there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so great point by Shane. One things that I like to reference, I know this was discussed in that article that you shared. It's change, right? Change is a very uncomfortable thing that we talk about, and radio has been, of course, very reluctant at times to make that change. And I'm one of those users when COVID came, it really just shed a bright light on some of those workflows. And I mean, for us here at RCS, we of course had our Line to Go product. So we, for us, it was just kind of, all right, we'll start scheduling remotely with Selector to Go or continue to broadcast live with Zeta to Go. But you can see that kind of reluctance to accept the change. And the reality is that this is not going to go anywhere. We were joking about putting, internet in space and all that good stuff. So, this is something where we should really embrace. And though I understand the last mile challenges are there, you were saying, Shane, with audio over IP, there were the same last mile challenges there too. So it's one of those things we shouldn't be afraid of this word cloud. We should really embrace it and try to, enhance our workflows to, to counter the technology that's there and available to us.
I
All
think,
right.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, let's go ahead, Dub. Absolutely.
And I think, maybe to Nate's point as well, COVID has really changed, has really pushed it along, for better or worse. It's really changed people's understanding of the fact that, it's changed our industry and we have to adapt. Firstly, because we've had to, but also we see that it's the financial benefits to doing so are becoming more clear, I believe.
Yeah, and it's really accelerated the work that a lot of folks were already doing, but I think people can hopefully get a little more confidence in using the cloud. There's new systems out that are doing complete production and most of the broadcast chain completely in the cloud, and they're being used on high profile events in real time. So people, hopefully you're not too reluctant to do that, because there's big players and big broadcasters that are embracing that right now.
The path is trod.
Yeah.
And definitely, you want to have some redundancy built in there, but yeah, there's a lot of, even looking at these webinars, we're cloud-based in our entire show and presentation schedule this year, which still can't beat the getting out in front of the people in real life, but hey, you do what you can with what you get to work with. So, it's nice to have the option. Last thing I'm going to grab from you, Nate, is just I think I picked every slide you sent me that had a picture of a cloud in it.
Yeah, so this just to break down this last slide here, we were talking about that hybrid workflows. This would be from the view of the user. So they'd have, just the URL. They can use Windows, Mac, PCs, all that good stuff. They can use their iPhones, Androids. It's true URL with Okta logins. And then at that point in time, you would have essentially your default Windows microphone, and wherever your source may be, it goes to your codecs and it gets sent to Zeta Cloud. And we have, again, some really cool hybrid workflows talking about COVID. We now have the capability with you have Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery. You can voice track on Zeta Cloud, which of course bypasses the need for a VPN. If you have an empty voice track position there, you can actually voice track in Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery, and it will land your local Zeta as well. So this would be essentially from the user perspective what they're seeing.
Excellent. And John, that's something that I know we've done a full webinar series about it, but some of the stuff we've done together, and it's one of the reasons that when we developed the HD multicast a whole bunch of years ago, instead of going with an embedded purpose-built box, we picked a big honking industrial computer, because at that point we didn't know exactly what we were going to be slamming onto it, and it turns out you can put a lot of stuff on a big honking industrial computer. So if you want to talk to this a little bit, this is our new project.
Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, this is a project that Telos and Nautel started probably, I don't know, a little over a year ago, maybe now. And the part that that Telos has provided at this point is the radio processing side. Some of you might be familiar with the Omnia products. And so we, quote unquote, virtualized the Omnia product, so it could run in servers and in the cloud. And then we provided an interface. We output FM multiplex and HD 1 through 4 in a synchronized fashion. And then that is tightly integrated with the Xperi importer exporter. So that's all running in a single instance. And the output of that, again, it's completely synchronized between HD and FM. The output of that then is sent over the public internet. In this case, we're using TCP IP for reliable transmission. And we send the MPX as well as the HD E2X across to the transmitter. So this kind of goes back to what Jeff quoted that Philip had said, where he's looking to the day when the transmitter just has the Ethernet jack. So this is quite a step in that direction, and we're continuing to push this solution forward. So in the future, we're looking to integrate other aspects of the radio transmission chain with things like the watermarking and mixing capabilities. So this will become a much more complete solution where there's very little hardware that's going to be needed at the studio end and at the transmitter site.
Right. And I mean, ultimately, obviously, if you have a failure, you have a failure. So backup systems are still necessary. But the fewer pieces of hardware you got in the air chain, the fewer wall warts can fail to take you down, as an example. One comment here, and John Huntley, John, I see you got no microphone, and I'm not going to drag you into it, but he made the comment he's old enough to remember when everything was developed by, or delivered by Telco. And I'm sure we all remember getting equalized lines set up. I don't, but that's okay. And then we installed our own delivery equipment to avoid that. And now we're going back to delivery via someone else's computer. And one of the concepts there, if I recall the reasoning, partly we went away from Telco, one, because of reliability. Copper oxidizes, gets cut, gets broken, somebody drives into a phone pole quite frequently. Number two was the cost, and especially as IP delivery became more cost effective, that's kind of an argument against that. Dub, do you got any thoughts on that?
I really don't. So when I first started working in radio, we did still have those equalized lines, but it was the generation before me that was responsible and installed them. But I think that, thinking about like a cloud-based solution now, what I'm hearing from people is that people don't want to own computers. They don't want to have data centers. They don't want to have to think about the HVAC, the power, and all of that stuff that goes with it. And so, what we're hearing is that people are just interested in outsourcing it, and now they believe that the technology is to the point where they don't have to be so obsessed, maybe, or fixated, if you will, on the last mile concerns. It's definitely a concern we have to address, and obviously we've touched on that quite a bit this morning. But people are really to the point now where like, I know at Wide Orbit, we offer our traffic fully hosted, and I know that RCS offers their products fully hosted, the non-automation products, and that's just something that's kind of expected these days. And so I see automation, which is our area of expertise, going in exactly that same direction.
Yeah, exactly. Tom makes a good point here. It took years to get hardware prices low enough we could afford to store audio linearly. The cloud's not a barrier to this. However, how do we get that perfect linear high quality audio to the transmitter site without bandwidth reduction? Not every transmission facility has access to a T1, and they're going to say T1s. What's the bandwidth limit on T1? About 1.8 megabits per second, give or take. So, I mean, when you look at wireless network connectivity, you're up into the 30 plus megabits per second there. So, there's a lot of options that are way beyond what we could do with a T1 even. But that is a good point. So, Nate, how would you guys address something like that?
So I think in the Zeta cloud-based disaster recovery world, of course, we have Zeta to Go, which is linked to your Zeta file server. So when we're talking about adding audio and all of that, you can do so remotely, kind of bypassing that. In regards to the play out for Zeta cloud-based disaster recovery, of course, we have the encoder and some ability there. So I'm just trying to think how to properly word this from the software side of things, but again, I keep going back to, I understand, this change aspect, and, technology is changing, and depending what your bandwidth is, there's some, I'm not going to say limitations as much as kind of, workarounds and identifying what's the best course of action to get you from point A to point B. Again, using the comparison from the San Francisco and Chicago, the last mile changes. So I think it really depends on each user, but I think I think the technology is going to be growing faster than we anticipate. And I think that's going to be something that we can take acknowledge.
And there are some areas I know where, it may not be feasible to put in a Wi-Fi bridge, for example, or you may not have hardwired internet or cable modem service. But even with those, an LTE-based cell phone modem is $100 a month, and that will give you some pretty decent bandwidth as well. Up into the 5-10 megabits range. So there are definitely some options, but certainly it is situational, as you say. John, this is I guess we can fly through this one pretty quick. It's just the Omnia 9S screen, but so totally software-based processor, not really new. I mean, StereoTool, Micro MPX, they've been around for a bit too. So, and really, when you hear about it, you got a lot of the same guys involved.
Well, yeah, we still have technology from folks like people probably know Leif and Hans, and we work with them and embrace their technology as well as our in-house technology. So it's it's a software world now when it comes to processing and deployment. So there's for folks who are moving in this direction, we can show you that this works reliably, and in fact it can scale much higher than a hardware deployment can scale. So it's got that flexibility to scale up and down, as well as you're only going to pay for the processing and the instances that you're using at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Mark Forrest makes a comment that reliability on someone else can be an issue, though you essentially have given control of your broadcast to another party. Yes, sort of, except it's just a path you're paying for. It's not a whole lot different than buying a pair of Mosleys and slapping one at the studio and one at the site. And if one of them fails, that you gave control of your broadcast to Mosley. I'm vastly oversimplifying, but again, it's a pathway. Definitely it can break, and definitely you want to plan for that.
If I could just, sorry, I was just going to add a comment to that our industry is definitely not the first industry to move to AWS and the cloud, and the banking industry and healthcare and many other examples. They obviously rely on those cloud providers. So we're, luckily we're not having to pave the way when it comes to that kind of reliability. We might have, more bandwidth and uptime requirements than some of those folks, but at least we're not starting from scratch there.
And if
Yeah.
John,
And I
if I
might
could,
also,
go ahead, please. Sorry.
we all spoke at once, so I'll just say, many companies, including Wide Orbit, use Outlook 365. So, all of our email is in the cloud and it's outside of Wide Orbit's control. And I suspect that's true of many organizations represented here today.
I was going to say, Dub, so for Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery, we use Amazon Web Services written for and on Amazon Web Services, including S3 buckets. And we get that same question: is what happens if Amazon Web Services go down? Well, if AWS goes down, first off, they're going to get it back up and running, or redundancy purposes, move it around and reshuffle all the resources. But second, if you know that AWS is going down for a long period of time, we have a much bigger issue on our hands than, other things there. So
Yeah, that's very true, Nate.
Now, and this slide addresses one of those things. So Chris Hayes mentions not many latency issues with banking. Well, more and more, especially as we move into HD radio with 8 to 10 seconds of delay inherent to the native design. Now, one of the things that we haven't discussed at all in ours is our reliable HD transport, and I'll put the little plug in for that, because it gives us the ability to increase the buffering so that you can lose the HD data for a whole lot longer and still have a signal going out on the air. When we first developed it, I tested it at NAB by unplugging the RJ45 from the back of the exporter, and 8 seconds later plugged it back in and didn't lose a single frame of audio. So, it's and that's where, and John, you can speak to this too, but AWS does load balancing, so you typically don't lose more than a couple of frames of the data, whether you're transporting micro MPX with analog audio, running HD data, whatever.
Yeah, and this diagram also shows how we've, as a proof of concept, distributed instances in North and South America, and we can seamlessly switch between them. So even within a deployment, we don't have to rely solely on AWS in one region. So we can improve the reliability just by taking advantage of the multiple regions that are available.
And that was one of the prime reasons for doing this test the way we did it. We hooked up we cloned the HD multicast as a virtual machine in 4 different Amazon servers, 2 in Ohio, 1 in Oregon, 1 in Brazil, and then systematically killed them all. And I mean, until we killed the 4th one, we didn't even use the hardware machine that we had back at the head office. But through it all, we had a signal on the air.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, the cool thing to me about this is that this isn't a real expensive solution. So you can have this kind of reliability and this kind of deployment in the cloud without spending a lot more than you would just to have a local server. So I think that's a really attractive thing. It's not just for some really large organizations that can take advantage of this.
And that's arguably, with virtualization, it's arguably one of the potential benefits that we haven't really talked about a whole lot. But we move away from a CapEx style of budgeting to an OpEx. So we go from capital expenses buying pieces of equipment to operational expenses with monthly service fees instead.
Yes.
And depending on your accounting setup, that in a lot of ways can be financially a whole lot better.
Especially talking about Windows these days, everybody is talking about those versions that they support and no longer support. And so Windows has definitely shortened that time range of what they dubbed, even Windows 10, we have like 3 unofficial Windows 10 releases. So that comes into play as well.
To say nothing of the fun caused by their updates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that comes down to a whole different argument, because like our HD multicast is Windows 10 based, but it's the LTSC edition too, long-term service contract. So you control the updates, and you don't have the standard, oh, we're going to kill all support in 30 days, buckle up.
Mhm.
So that helps a lot. Here's another question from Tom. Are we going to see automation system providers, hello automation system providers, start to certify or qualify which virtualization environments they support, like VMware, Hyper-V, AWS, Azure, et cetera?
So from the Zeta side of things, remember we have that hybrid model that we talked about, and I'm going to kind of talk about where we are today for the most part, and then adapt a little bit, and kind of you can use your imagination where this is going next. But currently with Zeta and Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery, as I said, they're treated as almost two different markets. And so you have essentially this ability, and I apologize, I had a thought and I just lost it in that question there with Tom. Remind me, sorry, Jeff, one more time. I just had the whole point and I just lost it.
No worries. He was just asking if you're going to see the providers start to qualify which virtualization environments you support.
Yes, thank you. So it's really about, for Zeta on a VM, it's about resources. That's kind of the biggest thing. And so what we're doing is identifying, what type of machine you have in which data center, and then talking about what you can do to allot, those resources to your instance. So if you have, let's say, a satellite news talk, it's gonna be a little bit different on their resources than, let's say, a music-only station with some voice tracking in there. And in regards to, as I said, with Zeta Cloud-based disaster recovery, it's built on and using AWS. You don't have to worry about those aspects. We'll handle all of the hardware resources. If you have a mixture of both, then we're talking about, putting Zeta on a VM. It's really about identifying those resources.
Right. Now I'm going to open Shane's mic up again because he put in a question. I think I've got the answer for it, but Shane, hit me with your question.
So one big question that has come up amidst all of this this talk of cloud-based and virtualization has been how to handle things like EAS, and along with that, things like Nielsen encoding. Those have been by far the two biggest question marks, because as of right now, there are no direct kind of software component replacements for those. And I know, well, I know at least in the case of, well, I'm not going to say, John, maybe I'll let you talk about it. There may be a solution to one of those two. But anyway, maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I'll jump in on one thing. So I don't know if anybody hasn't seen it. There's a webinar somewhere in our archive. I think we might have touched over it in the virtual NUG back in April. But what we're doing with New Hampshire Public Radio is virtualized HD multicasts. We've got 6 instances of the importer installed on one machine. So 6 unique importers on one box, each one feeding its own specific exporter at a remote site. The cool thing about that is then we can do EAS break-ins independently, or we could do encoding, Nielsen encoding independently. So, and that's, I think, where this becomes the most important. The most critical thing about all this, the biggest benefit, is flexibility. Because yeah, you've got, if you've got a situation like that in a virtualized environment, it's easy for me to say, well, we'll just clone this and add the EAS to that. A piece of cake. When I've got to buy a chunk of hardware at 10 grand plus a pop, that's a different conversation.
So I'll take the bait, Shane, and I can't tell you too many specifics, but as I mentioned, we're filling out this solution, the partnership with Nautel, with various pieces, and of course, watermarking is one of those that we're looking at very seriously. So we recognize that that's something that has to be solved here to provide a reasonable solution, because we can't run something in the cloud and then come back to some piece of hardware sitting somewhere just to do watermarking and then get it back up into the cloud. That's that's not going to fly for real broadcasting.
Right, and with a networked solution, that is a big challenge, like Shane brought up. But the ability to multiply virtualize stuff comes really beneficial. Alan Jurison's also in the audience, and he's got a comment on PPM and EAS. So, Alan, I've got you unmuted. If you want to unmute yourself,
Yeah, can you hear
we're
me?
happy to have you.
Can you hear me now?
You're
Good.
very good.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I know things are a little weird this fall with no person shows. You know, we didn't have the radio show in person, but there was a virtual radio show that the NAB offered. And speaking about a presentation, I was involved there that I'm sure NAB still has up on their site. I think they were, making them all the sessions available to be replayed. There are two parts about next generation technologies, mainly from the efforts of the NAB Radio Technology Committee that I and many other broadcasters are a member of. There were two things that were disclosed publicly about that kind of fit into this whole PPM and EAS situation. One on PPM, all three of the major PPM or audio processor companies have executed signed agreements from Nielsen, and they have an SDK to enable PPM watermarking in software, and that testing is ongoing. So expect to see in products like we've talked about here. I don't want to necessarily give you a release schedule because it's not my place. I'm not the manufacturer, but all three manufacturers of brand name processors have code and have stuff working in the labs. And actually, we made an announcement. The NAB RTC made an announcement combined with Nielsen and Cox Media Group and Bonneville and Orban. The first Orban AM processor, their new XPN processor, is actually on the air with software watermarked PPM encoding in 2 markets for this current present ratings period in Sacramento and in Atlanta on a Cox Media station in Atlanta and a Bonneville station in Sacramento. So Nielsen's using that as kind of their first testing ground, and those eventually will be rolled out as the manufacturers offer this software in FM-based products. You'll see similar tests like that, and they're going through the Nielsen process. I mean, it's already gone through it in the lab, but they're now going through the actual a whole full ratings period with it, and it's being monitored very closely by Nielsen and the MRC, the Media Ratings Council and such, to make sure everything's squared up with all of that. So that's some stuff we're going to see down the line, probably in the hands and in products next year, and would fit very well into everything you guys have been talking to in the last hour here. Another aspect that we spoke about is in the Xperi 5.2 code, which is in a beta release right now with the manufacturers. It's in hands for the manufacturers. We at iHeart have had our hands in this quite a bit and have a couple of test stations on the air. I would expect a release by the end of the year, but you'll be able to insert EAS audio from anywhere. And in Gen 4, you can originate HD2, HD3, HD4, any multicast audio from anywhere you have IP connectivity. So you can actually originate your HD2, 3, or 4 from another place that's outside of market, whether that be another market or whether that be up in the cloud or another server or data center. However you want to do it, you can send that audio to the market, and to meet your EAS requirements on the multicast channels, you can essentially buy a low-cost device that's about the size. I will use the word because it's kind of like it's almost like a pronoun now. It's like you can buy a barracks-like device, but it's made by 2WCOM. It's about that size. Its pricing's depending on options is in the $700 to $900, but you only need one end because the Gen 4 importer-exporter core is the decoder, is the decoder part of it. It actually will decode the EAS stream and allow it to insert into your HD2, 3, and 4 simultaneously. So you're no longer wedded to actually have, with both of those advancements, by the end of the year, broadcasters will have options. They're no longer wedded to have HD2, 3, and 4 multicast audio coming in physically into the market, breaking it out to analog or AES IO, just to do PPM watermarking and just to do EAS insertion to go back up into it. So that's a big piece of the puzzle that we've been working well with Xperi Xperi really did a lot of the legwork on that interruption, and of course Nielsen and the processor manufacturers on the PPM front.
Now, Alan, while I've still got you, and thanks very much for that info, would that lead itself also to local content insertion, like putting spots into a network program?
I don't think so in this particular aspect of it, because to get this available in Gen 4, I think long term that's a possibility. To get this available in Gen 4, the biggest issue that we have is that we wanted this to be an easy lift for Xperi to deliver a product this year, because we have an immediate need to do it now, not in several years. So there's some next generation efforts to be able to do that possibly. But the current framework, the problem is that the two capture clients, you have a capture client running wherever that has your main source audio, and then the insertion audio, the EAS audio, they're not time synced, and they don't know of they're not aware of each other. So because they, in the current implementation, they don't have awareness. They don't, like the EAS client doesn't know immediately what packet number to start adding on to. So that there is a little bit of buffering time when you go to switch to the alert. But for most people on their HD2, 3, and 4, if it's a pure play multicast channel, it's not a simulcast from an AM, they're already using some sort of hard EAS or AES or analog IO switcher, and they're just interrupting it when their main NDEC goes off, right? So it's not contemporaneous or placed strategically in line with programming on multicast channels. It's usually just interrupted, much like a cable or satellite TV provider does EAS. They just interrupt all the channels at once. So this essentially fixes that, and there is a little bit of buffering time. Guess what that buffering time is? It's 8 seconds. So, and it's mainly because the two clients aren't aware of each other. So what Xperi did as a trick, we did a lot of testing with receivers. I will say Xperi did a lot of testing with receivers. We validated it with some of our own testing. They did the lion's share of the work on it. But what they actually do is in the HD2, 3, and 4, they clear out 8.5 seconds of timing data in the HD2 audio. So the radio actually loses HD2, 3, or 4 lock for 8 seconds. So then the chip will reacquire essentially the HD2 from the EAS source, get the audio for the duration of the alert is done, and then you have that same rebuffering coming back. So it's not as seamless, but is a hard switcher, but it does free you from having to break it out into analog or XLR, analog or AES, XLR, IO in a market. So I think by the end of the year we'll have those kind of solutions available to the market. And as 2021 comes around, you'll see more FM processors that have that built in, whether they be FM processors that are hardware based that we're familiar with, or some of the software based ones that we've seen as well. So I think there'll be a menu of items that you'll be able to do.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Alan. That's very useful.
Nielsen is willing to work with other manufacturing partners. It's not constrained to the three processing manufacturers. We just thought that was a good starting point to get that part started, and all three of them had familiarity using the Nielsen TV SDK in their TV audio processing products. So we thought that was the quickest way to get stuff to market, right? To get actual products to market. But other manufacturers, like Nautel, if you want, they probably once they're done with this testing, would be willing to license it, if you needed it as a feature, or other products. There's a variety of products you could put it in. You could put it in codec, IP codecs. You could put it in STLs. You could put it in exciters. I mean, you can put it wherever you want, and it's just a software module at this point.
Right. Very cool. Excellent. Well, thank you for that.
Yep.
Shane, back to you for a second. Shane, actually, I'll just ask the question, but Shane said I should ping Nathan about local content insertion and splits.
Yes. In what relation, what regards? But for the in regards to local Zeta and the hybrid workflows, we have some workflows there in regards to how to have Zeta cloud-based disaster recovery continue to play those split spots. As well as when we have Zeta cloud-based disaster recovery, we do have a mass importer in there right now. And so if we're talking about, adding, bulk spots remotely, of course you have Zeta to go, that does require a VPN. So if you have a VPN that, needs to reference your Zeta file server, I told production directors that create a folder on your Zeta server, have the auto import task pointed to all of the stations you want with all of the asset types, song, link, spots, and then essentially utilize that folder in your VPN to save those 80 spots wherever they might come from, any kind of content delivery network. And then at that point in time, you can either use Zeta2Go to double check that everything is landed correctly. We still, of course, have Mark's analysis done automatically through Zeta. And if you have, mass importing through Zeta Cloud, again, a separate site, you can also do more with that too.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do local insertion, particularly if you're talking about spots, because then it could fit in with your reconciliation and your traffic systems and actual billing systems to make sure that the spots actually aired, as opposed to that using that EAS insertion method when doing it in there limits it just to HC2, 3, and 4, and there would really be no verification
lost
process.
audio. Just one moment while I click off and back again. All right, I'm back. I hope.
You're good.
You're back. Yep.
Welcome back.
Good, good. This is where I realized that I missed killing one program on my laptop before we started this. But so carrying on, back to John again. There's one other slide you sent which really intrigued me because it really lends, especially this year, to the fact that a lot of us don't necessarily work from the place we worked from this time last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in terms of pushing more and more into the cloud. The play out and automation side of it, the mixing side of it. We talked a lot about watermarking and EAS. So the vision is to host all of that in the cloud, but also be able to do the hybrid model where you can deploy on-prem and have just the simplest streams from there to the transmitter site. So we have a number of customers that are implementing this model. Most of them right now are going with an on-prem server farm, but then they can overflow into the cloud if they want to spin up a channel just on an ad hoc temporary basis. So it's the direction that we see broadcasters going, and there's of course the benefits that we have talked about in terms of the management of the system and the flexibility of it. And when in a hybrid model, it can often be less expensive to have the on-prem portion be used for your day-to-day broadcast needs, and then only pay for the cloud side of it when you actually need that.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And Dub, bringing you back in on just sort of to piggyback on Nathan's remarks on local insertion. That's something you can do too at Wide Orbit, right? I mean, it's not a unique thing.
It is not. In fact, I would say that pretty much our workflows would be nearly identical to what Nathan said. Similar with automatic media asset importers, and then multiple places where you could verify everything is correct and make ad hoc changes, whether that be in the station or on a device or at home on different platforms. It's very similar.
Excellent. Thank you. On that note, folks, we are hitting to the top of the hour. We do have some resources available. RCS has done some tips and tricks. That's a weekly webinar, Nathan?
Yeah, during COVID, we kind of thought that with all the craziness going on, you shouldn't have to worry about some of the smaller nuances of your daily workflows. So we, every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, I'm here and we do a Facebook Live breaking down a wide array of RCS products and just tips and tricks and just understanding like those questions you said about, if I'm a production director and I have to put in 80 spots, what's the best, most efficient way to do that? So it gives you an opportunity to answer those questions. And that link there is going to be an archive of all of the past videos we've done in high quality.
Excellent. And Telos's Kirk Harnack does This Week in Radio Tech, which talks about anything and everything of interest to radio overall. And that's always a good session. This webinar, of course, will be archived on both our website and our YouTube channel. Actually, I think one's a link to the other, but I don't talk about those details because that's above my pay grade. We have our weekly, quarterly Waves newsletter where somebody who looks a lot like me writes a little tips article that occasionally may have a useful tidbit of information. On that note, I want to thank everybody for coming. Dub Irvin from Wide Orbit, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Nate Mumford from RCS, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And John Schur from Telos Alliance, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
And folks, with that, have a wonderful week and we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.